turned a viral campaign into sustained marketing to help propel the mission of the ALS Association. So that's it for me. Without further ado, I'll turn it back over to Brian and Alyssa, and you all can get to the good stuff.
All right. Well, Brian, I'll pass it to you before I jump back in. Why don't you go ahead and give our 250 participants here just a quick introduction about yourself. Brian, do we have you here?
Can you hear me now, Alyssa?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Alyssa. So I definitely want to thank everybody that's able to join today. It's a real honor to be speaking with everybody. I've been looking through the chat here at everyone's titles, and I really feel like I'm among my peers here. So I hope that what I have to offer can provide some help and insight. At the very least, I can speak about the experiences that I've had here since the Ice Bucket Challenge. So thanks, obviously, to Prosper and everybody for helping arrange this, but happy to get started whenever you are.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Brian. And we really appreciate you being here today. As Robert mentioned, I think we all, as nonprofit marketers and leaders and people who work with the sector, found ourselves really inspired a couple of years ago by the Ice Bucket Challenge. And, wow, time has passed since then, and we'd love to get a sense of how the ALS Association has evolved since the Ice Bucket Challenge, how something that was so successful in such a concentrated and short period of time from a viral perspective has now turned into long-term sustained marketing success. So we'll get into that in a moment, but just by a quick way of introduction to myself, I know many of you on today's webinar do know me since you signed up through our email list, and some of you hopefully came from independent sector and don't know me, so I'll tell you just a bit more about who I am. I'm the president of Prosper Strategies, and we're a leading marketing consultancy for the nonprofit sector. We only work with nonprofits and really pride ourselves on that specialization. So in that work, we've helped hundreds of change makers, organizations from Boys and Girls Clubs, McCormick Foundation to University of Chicago, really advance their missions through their marketing. And in our work, we specialize in brand strategy and marketing planning, but we also offer implementation and enablement services and educational resources for nonprofit leaders and marketers like this webinar. So as Robert mentioned, earlier this year, we published our Nonprofit Marketing Manifesto. That's where we lay out our vision for the new future of nonprofit marketing. And as you've probably heard, if you've been following along with us for a while, we really do believe that the nonprofit sector is on the cusp of a marketing revolution, that the sector has thought far too small about marketing for far too long for a bunch of reasons that are somewhat inside our control and somewhat outside of it as nonprofit people. But we at Prosper, through our educational work and series like this, are really on a mission to change that. So we believe that marketing can and should be integrated into every goal that your nonprofit sets. And that when that happens, marketing really becomes a tool for mission impact and social change. And that's what we're so excited to kick off this series to talk more about, and today just kind of begin to scratch the surface of that through great insights from Brian and from Robert, and then we're embarking on, as Robert mentioned, this 13 webinar series where we'll dig in deeper to each of those commitments in our manifesto. So let's go ahead and dive into today's agenda. Sorry about that. We'll share a little bit more before we get into some Q&A with Brian about why we feel the nonprofit sector needs a marketing revolution. I'd also like to propose, before we get into this series, a new working definition for nonprofit marketing. We feel it's so important to be clear about what we're talking about and define this world in concrete terms. And then we'll get into the meat of today's webinar. We'll cover the 10 commitments savvy nonprofits are making to elevate marketing. And as mentioned, we'll be digging into each of these commitments deeper, each one in its own standalone webinar. So today will just be an introduction where I'll share each of those 10 commitments. And then for each one, we have a question or two, some deep thinking questions for Brian, where he will give us a sense of how the ALS Association is making or aiming to make that commitment following the Ice Bucket Challenge. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end of today's webinar for attendee Q&A. So like I said, please go ahead and chat in throughout. I'll be watching the chat box as much as I can and aiming to go back to your questions and pass them back to Robert and Brian as appropriate here as we wrap up. And then finally, we will share a couple of ways to go deeper in addition to our next webinars. How can you start your own marketing revolution now as you get into 2019 and feel inspired, hopefully, by the ideas that we've shared on today's webinar. Okay, so this marketing revolution, what do we mean when we say a marketing revolution? We're passionate about the idea that it's time to change the way the nonprofit sector thinks about marketing, just like Dan Pelota and so many other thought leaders have aimed to change the way we think about overhead. We'd like to change the way we think about marketing and communicating our missions and driving those missions forward through the powerful tool of marketing. So let me tell you a little bit more about why we think the nonprofit sector needs a marketing revolution. I don't think it's any secret to anyone on this webinar that the world we're operating in today has more need than ever. Your organizations are likely being asked to do more with less. Cuts to federal and state-run social services are leaving more people hungry, homeless, otherwise unable to meet their basic needs, and that means that more people are turning to the nonprofit sector for help. There's also greater competition for less money. Again, no secret to anyone on the line here today. We don't like often to talk about competition in the nonprofit sector, but the fact remains that cuts to government grants have decreased the total pool of money available to nonprofit organizations, while at the same time, new nonprofits are launching at a record pace. And some of you may have seen this, that we've actually seen over 40% growth in the nonprofit sector since the 1990s. So standing out and differentiating yourselves, whether you want to talk about competition or collaboration, is becoming more difficult than ever. And then, of course, there's the conversation about disappearing donors. So while total charitable giving might be on the incline, we know that the total number of donors who are actively giving is on the decline. We know that there are new tax laws and additional regulations that are, in many cases, really discouraging charitable giving. And this means that the steady stream of private donations that many of your organizations have relied on for a long time is likely to begin shrinking if it hasn't already. So if you're feeling that your donors are disappearing or you're worried that they're going to, you are certainly not alone. And then, of course, there's the issue of those darn unpredictable millennials as well. And I think I can get away with saying that only because I am a cusp millennial. But millennials are causing us to scratch our heads, I think, at nonprofit organizations. Millennials are officially entering the scene when it comes to supporting nonprofits, but we're all still trying to figure out how they're going to give, where they're going to give, how we can compel them to have loyalty to our organizations. We know millennials feel that they have nearly unlimited options for social investment, everything from crowdfunding campaigns that support their friends' medical expenses to venture philanthropy funds that support the explosive social enterprise space. So when millennials enter the picture, as they already are, it means that this highly competitive fundraising landscape we're all operating in is becoming even more difficult for most organizations. So we do believe that marketing can be part of the solution, and we think it's an under-recognized potential part of the solution. We believe that marketing can and should play a role in every goal that you set in your nonprofit strategic plan. Everything from the obvious, like fundraising, to the less obvious, like interim services, recruiting staff and volunteers, advocating for policy change, educating stakeholders about key issues, driving behavior change, building partnerships, and so many more things. If there's a goal in your strategic plan that marketing can't, at least in some way, address, I'd love to hear about it, because we do truly believe that in some shape or form, marketing should play a role in advancing every goal that you set. But in order to start thinking about marketing that way, we believe that we need a new definition for nonprofit marketing. So I'd like to propose this one. I'd like to propose that we think about nonprofit marketing as the activities, touch points, and messages that motivate stakeholders to take actions that advance our nonprofit's mission and create sustainable social change. If you are like me and enjoy looking up different definitions for words about what you do, you might have seen that pretty much every definition you can find online about marketing or in a dictionary, if you're using a paper dictionary, is focused on driving revenue and corporate sector marketing activities. And while revenue, of course, is important to our organizations, it's only part of the picture. We're driving that revenue to sort of a deeper goal of creating social change and advancing our missions. So I'd like to challenge us all as we enter into this series to think about marketing a bit broader and deeper, not just think about it as raising awareness, not just think about it as fundraising and driving revenue, but think about it as a tool for mission advancement and social change. So it really is time to begin thinking bigger about nonprofit marketing, time to make that commitment. And today is the start, I hope, for many of you of making that commitment to thinking bigger, of finding ways to pursue marketing at every level of your organization, in every part of your strategic plan. And in a moment, we will get into what those 10 commitments are we think you should begin making as you think bigger about marketing. But before we do, just want to remind you here that all of this is based on a piece of work that we published earlier this year called our Nonprofit Marketing Manifesto. So as you're following along, if you want to jump over to the URL here, prosper-strategies.com/manifesto to follow along, I invite you to do that. You can also download after today's session. And I should note before we jump in that we will be sending around today's slides as well as a recording of today's webinar. So you can always go back and download the manifesto following today's session. But let's go ahead and dive into the 10 commitments and get into what I know you're all here for, which is a great conversation with Brian. And I will start by sharing with you the first of the 10 commitments in our manifesto, commitments that we feel all of you can and should make to begin thinking bigger about nonprofit marketing. And the first one is really the biggest and broadest and farthest reaching. It says that we will recognize marketing as a tool for driving social change. What we mean when we say this is that we will acknowledge that when leveraged properly by nonprofits like ours, marketing truly is capable of changing the world. So dialogue that we've had about marketing being a nice to have, or if we had more budget, maybe we would consider marketing so that we could get some more donors in our database, things like that. But that's small thinking, that's not enough to drive our missions forward. And we'll acknowledge that marketing is actually truly essential to the work that we're all doing and the reason that we all show up to work at our organizations every single day. So get into our discussion here. Brian, I hope that we still have you and can still hear you, but would like to talk first. Yep, we have you. Just about how, the Ice Bucket Challenge really brought you into a whole new universe at the ALS Association from a marketing perspective. I'd love to hear more about how you turn the challenge into more than just an awareness tool, which it was, of course, great at raising awareness, and really used it to drive the association's goals forward, both during and then beyond the challenge, since that was really what put you on the map for many people who may not have known about the ALS Association's work.
Sure. Thanks, Alyssa, and thanks for what you just presented. I enjoyed that. So we were in a very unique position in that the Ice Bucket Challenge wasn't created by us. It was something that organically came about within the community. And folks may not realize that it wasn't even about ALS at first. There were a bunch of cold water challenges going around where you could just sort of make it for any charity of your choice. But it was because of a couple guys with ALS and their networks that it sort of started to crystallize around ALS. And here at the association, I was brought in as a consultant to try and help the association at the time. I stressed that no matter what, this was the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. This was, every instance that we said in the media, I said, emphasize the ALS of the Ice Bucket Challenge. And so we really tried to drive this point that it was not just the Ice Bucket Challenge, but the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. And I think that eventually took hold. And so what it did was raise awareness of a disease that people previously had no knowledge or connection to. We're a rare disease. There's only about 20,000 people in the U.S. that have ALS. But what we did was try to use it to shed light on this disease in a new way for people. And over the course of interviews that we did and satellite media tours with our CEO and with the organizers of with the founders of the Ice Bucket Challenge, as we call them, we really tried to advance this cause and advance the mission as opposed to just focusing on the challenge itself and how much money was being raised. And then in the next year, we were faced with the question of, okay, well, what do we do now? So obviously we had this amazing moment in history, and what do we do next? And so we convened a number of different stakeholders, particularly people with ALS and their caregivers, members of our board, et cetera. And, you know, ultimately, and many people had ideas, we should do this kind of challenge, we should do that kind of challenge. It kept coming back to the fact that we were defined by the Ice Bucket Challenge. And so we couldn't really sort of move away from that without losing all that that brought. And so what we tried to do was do it again, to be honest. And the following year, we had a campaign, and we got Major League Baseball involved. Every team did it. We got the founders again to kick it off. We got all the ALS organizations together and tried to launch it again so that it would become an annual event. Because if it could become an annual event like Movember or any of these other annual fundraising events, Girl Scout cookies, it would be something that, you know, would benefit ALS for the long term. But there was enough, I think, enough folks had sort of moved on and thought, well, that's a one-time thing. There was some consumer confusion, like, is this still the same thing? That we just sort of said, all right, well, it certainly raised a little bit of money, but not what we were hoping for. So then we pivoted and said, okay, well, now let's focus on this disease as and I'll wrap it up here. Let's focus on this disease as a historical moment in time. So we created a campaign called Every Drop Adds Up, which was a platform that enabled us to say, well, everybody came together and we all worked together and we did this amazing thing called the Ice Bucket Challenge, and it made a difference. So it's proof that every little thing adds up. So every gene adds up, every walk, every step, every dollar adds up. And that's what we've used since, and you know, it seems to have served us pretty well.
That's great. And do you find, Brian, that people still reference the Ice Bucket Challenge frequently as the way that they came into contact with the ALS Association and your mission?
Yes, absolutely, without a doubt.
Yeah. It's great to hear, though, that even though it wasn't able to become an annual effort, that you were able to use really an awareness building campaign as a springboard into something bigger and a deeper conversation. Okay, well, very good. And we'll keep things moving here. So with commitment 2, we'll get in a whole lot deeper to kind of what this looks like, the post-Ice Bucket Challenge world at the ALS Association. But commitment number 2 says that we will develop a strong brand image and identity in alignment with our mission and values. So here we're talking about brand image as what you look like on from the outside to the world, and identity as what you believe, what you stand for internally. So this commitment asks us to recognize that our brands are the keys that unlock our mission and values for our stakeholders, and really to treat them accordingly, to give our brands that elevation in our organization and that importance that they deserve. So on this note, both I think before and then especially after the Ice Bucket Challenge, curious to hear from you, Brian, how the ALS Association's brand image and identity reflects your mission and values, and if it's evolved at all over time as a result of the Ice Bucket Challenge or other shifts to go deeper on your mission.
Yes, definitely. It has definitely evolved. One of the things that I and our board has been driving has been to focus on the ALS part of our name and not so much the association. So, you know, let's put some emphasis on the disease rather than the organization. So here at the ALS Association, we have a 3-pronged mission, which is research, care services, and advocacy, as opposed to some organizations which, you know, may just focus on research or advocacy or and so we think that all 3 of these parts are critical to finding a cure. And as a result, you know, we stress that we fight ALS on every front, and that's what our brand image and identity is, that we're fighting ALS on every front. So for research, when we talk about a research program, we say, you know, that we don't just have a research program, we have the premier global research program in the world. We fund the best research anywhere in the world. We're not just one lab, we're a series of labs. We're everybody in those labs. For care, you know, we're able to provide, especially since the Ice Bucket Challenge, a much bigger footprint and serve more people with ALS than we ever have been before. And from advocacy perspective, you know, we point to the legislative wins that we've been able to have, and how we've been able to leverage the Ice Bucket dollars to increase federal level. If you look at our research spending over time, NIH and DoD has increased in terms of its own research spend as a result. So all these things sort of came together, with this, I think, three-pronged mission that we have, our full mission, as we call it, to drive a much stronger brand. And now we're really moving toward not just the association, but moving toward the disease itself. But we can talk a little bit more about that later.
So interesting. And did you feel that sort of the success of the Ice Bucket Challenge helped others at your organization at the leadership level or elsewhere on your board understand in a deeper way the importance of your brand and the fact that brand and marketing were important?
Yeah, definitely. I think it helped them also understand, the full sort of scope of our work and the size of our organization. So we're a federated model where we have 39 different independent chapters that make up our organization. And what it did was, rather than each of those independent chapters sort of doing their own thing and then occasionally meeting once or twice a year as a large body, it helped the organization see that we are one sort of organization with one mission, and we need to be focused on that mission and advancing that, rather than what each individual piece needs or wants, and that we're much greater than the sum of our parts. And so I think that that's been the real legacy of the Ice Bucket Challenge.
That's excellent. And I think what so many people on this webinar would probably hope for as the outcome of, I think we'd all hope for that kind of viral success, but then to have that sort of outcome from it long term be a dream for many on this webinar, I believe. So sorry, jumped ahead there a minute. That leads in just perfectly, I think, to commitment number 3, which is also about brand, but this commitment says that we will build cohesion internally and communicate with consistency externally. So this really gets at problem that we see frequently in nonprofit organizations, where there's inconsistent messaging from the very start, because everyone within our organizations has their own way of talking about what we do. And there is not a real consistent message, a real foundational message that runs through everything we talk about with our organization. So when we make this commitment, we're saying that we will recognize that in order to advance our missions, we must build trust, and that to build trust, there must be consistency in how we see ourselves internally within our organizations, how we act, and how we represent ourselves externally. So on this front, Brian, interested to hear from you what you've done concretely, if there's any tips you can give us along the way, to get your staff and board members and volunteers on the same page about your brand image and identity. How do you ensure that everyone is communicating that same consistent basic message, but that you're still not blocking off the ability to personalize communications and really get that the personal message of everyone's individual work and impact into the conversation?
Sure. So I think what we do, what probably many of the folks on this call do, which is to put together a strategic communications and marketing plan that aligns with the overall strategic plan of the organization. And of course, we influence the communications part of that strategic plan. But we have a much more detailed strategic communications and marketing plan that we share internally with all of our various stakeholders, and we focus on various parts of it. I expect that our chapter communicators, that it's their jobs and within our chapters to do these sorts of marketing and communications work, know this plan top to bottom. But our board members, I focus on just sort of the high level talking points and framing when I speak to them about it. So we really work with our chapters, work with our volunteers, and try and help them understand exactly how we want to message and frame our organization, and at the same time we solicit feedback and ideas from them. Now, as I mentioned, we're a federated model, so we have 39 chapters that many of them want to frame things in their own way, and we certainly obviously appreciate that and want to help encourage that, because sometimes that leads to the best sorts of ideas and communications. But obviously at times it's challenging too, because we may disagree with how they want to frame things. And so we have a style guide and a brand guide, and we have to flag things from time to time, but not usually. I do think that we are in a period of transition right now, and as I mentioned earlier, by placing more focus on the disease ALS, that's really going to be a challenge for some parts of our organization who have wrapped up their identity, their brand identity, within their particular chapter or their particular efforts, initiatives. And so trying to help people see that the cause itself and the disease is the most important thing that we need to get folks thinking about.
Right. And we see that so commonly, that individuals really put as the lead in their message whatever their specific initiative or department or program is, without tying it back to the broader mission and that most important communications goal, which in your case is the disease. So that's a work in progress for many organizations, but I think what you're experiencing is indicative of what we see with a lot of our clients. And a question here related to this coming in from Colleen Brink. Thank you, Colleen, for the question. She's wondering who created your marketing plan, and I think the same question would go for your brand style guide. Was it created by your department, Brian? Did you have a marketing firm work with you on it? Did you engage your board at all?
Yeah, it's a great question, Colleen. I actually usually take the first cut at drafting this with my immediate communications team, and then begin to seek input on it from the chapters, from the board. We have a development and communications committee that I share things with. Although it tends to get a bit granular, and so I try and keep the development and communications committee at a much higher level and focused on what our overall top level messaging is. But for something like the brand and style guide or the strategic marketing plan, I usually, as I say, bake it about 80%, and then have other folks help contribute to finish it off and really tweak it so that it's where it needs to be. But I think folks appreciate usually when you take the first cut at things and they can respond to it, and rather than having to create it from whole cloth. So that's kind of the way that process works.
Yeah, and that's your expertise, right? And owning that expertise and then seeking input where it matters, and doing so in a way that makes people feel engaged, but not that they have too much control over an area that's not necessarily in their expertise or is the best and highest use of their time. I think that's an important balance to strike. You don't want to get to a point where you're managing marketing by committee, but at the same time, one of the biggest challenges that we see to really advancing a strategic marketing plan, or if there's a rebrand or a brand messaging initiative, is lack of buy-in from internal stakeholders. So I think it's great to hear for everyone here, Brian, just how you're engaging people and the fact that you're bringing something that's mostly baked, but still gathering that input in a way that makes people feel engaged and probably positively impacts your end product. Okay, very good. So let's move on to commitment number 4. This is one of my favorites. This one says that we will treat all of our stakeholders as brand ambassadors. We will recognize that every person within our organizations has the potential to amplify our brands, our missions, and our impact. And that's within our organizations, and in some cases outside of our organizations as well, right? The clients and beneficiaries that we interact with through our organizations are also brand ambassadors. So would love to hear a bit more of your thoughts, Brian, related to turning people into brand ambassadors, both during and following the Ice Bucket Challenge. And obviously it was a great viral success, as we've talked about already. But I'm guessing, tell me if I'm wrong, that not everyone who participated actually really understood in the way you wanted or needed them to the work that your organization is doing to fight ALS. Or continue to really advocate for that work, take action, be a brand ambassador following the campaign. So what did you do, or are you continuing to do, because I'm sure this is an ongoing challenge, to turn people who really have the potential to be those brand ambassadors into brand ambassadors and give them the fodder that they needed to go out and spread your message into the world.
Yeah, certainly we saw that people who did the Ice Bucket Challenge, for many of them did not understand what ALS is or anything about it. I do see that there's several requests to talk about that. So actually, Alyssa, it's a great setup. But if you leave that slide up, I'll come back to it in a second.
Sure.
There's a question about from in the chat by several folks about what advice I would give to people who are essentially one-man bands in terms of trying to elevate their strategic marketing. It's an excellent question. I can say that I have been in that position before, where I've been, a one-man band and trying to advance new campaigns and new ideas and get my board to a certain place. I think, off the top of my head, I mean, it really just depends on involving more people within your immediate circle. So, and I realize that you're looking for a better answer than that, but you can have the sort of best marketing and strategic plan. You can have the best ideas. You can have wherever you're at. If you don't have folks to have a conversation and a dialogue with, an exchange of ideas about this, I think you're in a really difficult and challenging position. And so, it seems to me that I'm not sure if the folks on the phone that are working for smaller nonprofits with one paid staff member have boards that they can rely on, but that certainly is a place to start. But really, it's maybe peer groups. So Katie says maybe strong committees too. If you can get a committee together, absolutely. We have. I oftentimes use an informal committee. I have a panel of people with ALS, their caregivers, communications professionals that I sort of have on an email list, and I, float ideas by. I engage in conversation, and there's obviously you sort of get what you pay for sometimes in terms of participation, and folks don't participate, but other times it sparks a good conversation that advances, at least in my mind, where we need to be at. And so I would try and encourage folks to expand their immediate inner circle of people that they can discuss this, just being able to discuss things on a daily basis. If not, I would encourage maybe some kind of peer groups, which, maybe Alyssa, you and your firm help organize.
Perfect.
Yeah, go ahead.
Perfect lead into what I'll share at the end today about a peer group that we'll be launching in January. It's the first time we're putting a peer group together, but it's, I think, exactly what we're all trying to solve here for you is how do we bring people together who are like-minded at small organizations and create kind of that brain trust so that you can start to move some of these things forward in a smaller organization. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, and let me think further on that question. That was just sort of my initial reaction without having thought about it much, but obviously I empathize with all of you who are in that position, because I've been there before and I know how challenging it is. So hopefully, we can try and help come up with some solution. So back to your original question, Alyssa, which was about the viral nature and about turning folks into brand ambassadors. So I'm really actually less concerned about the ALS Association brand, and I'm more interested in the ALS brand. And, I think to a lot of folks, they don't even see the difference. Oftentimes I tell my friends, like, I'm talking about some other ALS organization, and they're like, what, there's another ALS organization? Why? And you're like, well, no, there's actually, 10 different ALS organizations, and they all have different missions, and they're all doing great work. But I'm less interested in focusing on our organization and our name than I am on trying to advance the cause of ALS and the brand of ALS and taking ALS and actually branding it as a disease is where my current work is. And so I want people to care about the disease and not necessarily care so much about our organization, because if they care about the disease, I know that the organization will follow. And so we have a couple campaigns coming out right now that focus on ALS and not necessarily the association. For the people that took the Ice Bucket Challenge, it really means educating them about the disease and the impact of the Ice Bucket Challenge donations. So, you know, we're about to launch a PSA campaign with a prominent celebrity who will remind people of the Ice Bucket Challenge and that their donations had an impact. And that will be sort of the start of sort of educating folks, looking back about how everybody came together and made a difference, and here's how it made a difference. And that's what we're doing over the next several months.
Really interesting, and I think the perfect way to underscore that point about marketing being about more than just raising awareness of your organization, thinking about that next level of mission impact. And if ALS has the awareness that you're hoping for in the future, if people understand ALS and are committed to the cause of finding a cure, that can only help your organization advance its goals. Okay, exactly. Very good. Thank you. And so this actually gets a bit at what some of the questions about kind of what you can do with a smaller team, where we were going with that. But commitment number 5 mentions that we'll develop a marketing plan that aligns with our strategic plan and recognize that marketing can impact every single one of our strategic goals. So this is the commitment where we say that we will stop developing our marketing and communications plans in a vacuum and instead make marketing planning an integral part of strategic planning. This is one of the most essential commitments within our manifesto. If this one is not followed through on, I think it's very difficult to advance some of these other commitments. So I would love to hear, just by way of example from you, Brian, some of the goals in the ALS Association strategic plan beyond raising awareness that marketing is playing a role in advancing. I'd love to hear how you're thinking about integrating marketing at that higher level to the association's broader goals.
Sure. And so obviously I can't go through the whole strategic plan, but as an organization, I'll give you a couple examples. As an organization, we've sort of, we've really moved over the last few years from a much more siloed organization where research and care services and advocacy sort of did their own things and were their own arms and even had their own communications platforms and messaging. And, you know, I came in just after the Ice Bucket Challenge and looked at it and said, wait, so our policy people have their own Twitter and are doing their own things from our care services people and our research people. And immediately put a stop to that and said, we need to integrate all of our messaging. We need to think about our mission as being integrated. So our branding about our organization has to be about this importance of the three legs of the stool that we have here, and not just about any individual piece. And so, you know, we've done that through the last few years. But then we sort of really want to improve within those mission areas the marketing of those particular mission areas. So, you know, I look at something we just finished with our research program, where we gave a grant to an individual to research kids as caregivers, because not a lot of people realize, but kids end up serving as caregivers for people with ALS, for their parents. And it's obviously a very difficult and heavy situation for them, because now they're caring for their dying parent. So given that we're a rare disease, they usually don't have anybody else to speak with. So this researcher spoke to them about what sorts of things that they say and how they process this and how they learn from it. And we then took those findings and turned them into a series of illustrated guides called Kids Talk About ALS. And we found a Marvel comic illustrator to do the drawings, and all the language is directly from what these kids said. So, you know, and then we worked with an agency to build a web-based version of the guides. And so, you know, from the beginning, the communications and marketing team was a part of this process. And I think it crossed from this grant that research had given to this professor to care services and what they're doing. And so now we have this service and this sort of platform for kids that we didn't have before. And it's because of the way that communications and marketing, I think, sort of put everything into a nice sort of package that's why it ultimately will be successful, I hope. So we're really excited to roll those out. The other thing that we recently did was, I'm sure many of the folks here do peer-to-peer fundraising and have walks. For us, our Walk to Defeat ALS program is you know, our biggest fundraising platform, and all of our chapters have sometimes multiple walks. I think we do something around 150 to 200 walks a year. And so, but what was missing in those walks was some sort of a core mission component. And really, you know, as great as walk days are, and they're my favorite, is, you know, you go and you interact with everybody with ALS and their family and their caregivers and their supporters, most importantly, that are there to help them. And it's just, it's so fun. And what was missing was this core mission element. So we created something called Unlock ALS. And the idea is that, you know, we're trying to find a key to unlock this mysterious disease that literally locks a person in their body. And so, you know, we created Unlock ALS, and now people at the walks have lanyards with keys around their neck, and you know, they're color coded based on what their connection to the disease is. And there's a ceremony where they sort of present keys to people, and you know, there's pin-ups where people can sign their keys to a certain loved one or somebody. And man, we've received great response to that. Like, everybody loves this element of our walks, and so it's taking it from just being a sort of fundraising and awareness day to something that sort of helps to advance our mission via this campaign. So that's another example. But yeah, we definitely try and insert ourselves in as much as we can to help our different mission areas advance their goals.
Both such great examples, and I wish we had another hour here to hear a bunch more. I hope this is as inspiring to others on the line as it is to me, but this is exactly what we're going for when we talk about aligning your marketing efforts with the goals in your strategic plan and with your mission. Is, of course, a fun awareness building campaign is fantastic, but if it's not aligned back to the most important things you aim to achieve and that mission you hope to advance, it's just a fun campaign, right? So I love hearing how Brian kind of ties this all back to the why behind these efforts and initiatives. Really fascinating. And in the interest of time here, we are going to leave it there from a commitment perspective. Got through 5 of the 10 commitments, so hopefully that got your appetite whetted a bit for the rest of the commitments to come. And as I mentioned, we will be featuring each one of the commitments in a deeper way throughout our series of 13 webinars. But just to give you a bit of a preview here, other commitments that we'll be talking about throughout the year are investing properly in marketing, a piece that I know a lot of you are probably frustrated by within your own organizations, getting the budget that you need to be effective from a marketing perspective and viewing marketing as mission support, not just overhead. We will be talking about ensuring that marketing is overseen at a high level of your organization, ideally within your C-suite if you have one, if you're large enough, but that even as marketing elevates within an organization, that you're not losing the ability for everyone to contribute to marketing success. We'll also be talking about building partnerships through marketing, which I'm sure Brian has thoughts on, and hopefully we can capture them somewhere else someday in a blog post or you know, another webinar down the road. But so important to, as we see success in small ways through one-off campaigns, think about how we can leverage that brand that we've been building to develop deeper partnerships and really have an asset that others want to invest in. And then we'll be talking about one of my favorite commitments, and that's avoiding sacrificing the dignity of the people we serve for the sake of our missions and marketing. So when we get into this commitment down the road later this year and through our other webinar series, we'll be talking about this idea of poverty porn and stereotype porn and all the close cousins related to those things, the risk that they can have of really harming the people that you aim to help. So look forward to that one. And finally, we'll be talking about on commitment number 10, measuring the impact of marketing on our missions and continually optimizing marketing through measurement, seeing what's working and making efforts to improve our marketing based on what we're learning from a metrics perspective. So seeing some good chats where people are interested in hearing more on these other commitments. I would like to spend a few minutes here, and we can go probably about 10 minutes over if anyone's willing and able to stay on. It sounds like Brian is, just with open questions or going back to any of these commitments. But before we do, since I know some people will need to jump, just want to share a couple of ways that you can get in deeper with Prosper Strategies and our thought partners at Independent Sector, ALS Association, and other future guests on starting your own marketing revolution. Would encourage you definitely to go and sign up for the rest of our webinar series. You'll find a link within the deck that we'll send around in the follow-up email today. But the form to sign up for all webinars and just make sure you're automatically enrolled is at prosper-strategies.com/webinar-archive. Back to the question about, how can we drive this forward at a smaller organization or even maybe a larger organization where you're looking for more thought partners. We're launching a pilot at Prosper Strategies this year of a program called the Nonprofit Marketing Revolutionaries Mastermind. And we would encourage you to, yes, thank you for the typo there, Heather, it is strategies. Encourage you to go take a look at prosper-strategies/mastermind. Who knows how that got copied in throughout all these links, but we'd love you to visit there. We'll get the correct links into the version that we send around. But the mastermind is an opportunity for you to work with a small group of 12 other nonprofit marketers and leaders to bring these commitments through within your organizations. We'll be each month having some open discussion about the commitment of the month, following the same track as the commitments we are talking about on this webinar series. And then each person within the small mastermind group will be introducing a challenge that they're facing at their organization, and we'll be kind of workshopping and thinking through solutions to that challenge as a group. So look forward to having you check that link out. Feel free to email me questions about what the group will look like. We're shaping a couple of different groups so that we can have organizations of similar size and mission area grouped together. And then finally, if you want to go deeper here, again, we'll get you the correct links on these in the follow-up version. Invite you to download our manifesto at /manifesto. It'll give you a sense of what each of these commitments will be about and what we'll be covering in the webinar series for the rest of the year. So with that said, here is my contact information if you would like to reach out to me for further discussion on any of this, have questions about the upcoming webinar series or mastermind. But I would love to just spend our last couple minutes here for anyone who can hang on the line, going back to some of your questions in the chat. And having Brian share a few more thoughts with us if he's willing and able.
Sure.
All right, so I'll go back here to Gabriella's question, and this is a bit of a long one, but going back to when you were talking, Brian, about branding the disease versus the organization. She says that I agree that we all have the same end goal of raising awareness for the cause, but what if as a small nonprofit, people confuse your organization with another much larger one? For example, people start fundraisers where thousands of dollars in donations are unknowingly going toward the international organization, leaving a local organization struggling to meet their donation goals. We struggle with people confusing our small local brand with a large international organization that we receive funding from. Ooh, I've heard that problem before. Brian, I'll think about my response, but curious if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, it's a really excellent question. So, you know, the first sort of thing I would say is, you know, obviously it's a very general question without knowing the details of the organization, but are your particular goals and is your mission very closely aligned with this other international organization, or are you doing something completely different? It's just for the same cause. And so, if you're very closely aligned and this just happens to be a much bigger organization, then it seems to me like the local is your point of differentiation. So the most important thing for you to do is to define what that point of differentiation, what those differentiators are, and then to draw upon those. For instance, we have a smaller organization in the ALS space that is a research lab, and they're very good at portraying, at presenting themselves as really intensely focused on the research, and that's their sole goal, is to focus solely on the research. And so that differentiates them from us, who as I said, we have a three-pronged mission, and thus, in the minds of some people, suggests that we're not, as engaged on the research as we should be. Which isn't true, but it's and I give them credit for doing that. And I think in your situation, if you can find what that is that you are doing that's uniquely different and well, and then focus on that, which I expect that you're trying to do, it would be better. I know that these days with search engine optimization, search engine marketing, that you're able to very specifically focus on your core target market, and just define those parameters so that you're only marketing to the people that you need to be marketing to. And that's obviously easier said than done, but if you can focus on your core audience of who exactly you're targeting, and point a message that explicitly perhaps differentiates yourself from this other organization, but probably more, I think probably more focuses just on yourself. The more you can sort of establish your own identity as related and distinguished from theirs, I think the better. I don't know. I'd be curious as to your thoughts, Alyssa.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I was nodding along just because the thoughts you offered were several of the ideas I was going to share. I think the only other thing that I would suggest is, depending on the other, national or international organization that people are turning to instead of your smaller local organization, depending on who that is and how different their mission is from yours, how if you have an existing relationship with them or are able to build one, I might try to get in touch with someone there and discuss with them the challenges you're having, and really brainstorm with them about where they want to play, where you want to play, and what you could each do to send your stakeholders in the right direction, so that they're putting their dollars and their support, other types of support, to the most effective place for your kind of unique area that you focus on, more versus the unique area that the national or international organization focuses on. I highly doubt that you are exactly the same and that your missions are exactly the same. So find that point of difference and hopefully try to partner with them to figure out how to send people in the right direction. Okay. Good. So I'm just skimming through the questions here. I am going to take just one or two more, depending on how long we go. I want to be respectful of Brian's time here that he so generously offered to us. But I think there's a couple more good questions coming in. So this one's from Arpy at Reading Partners. How did you get the local chapters on board with the Ice Bucket Challenge campaign? Was there broad support and participation across all chapters? And was that, I think this is the most important part, was that an important element for your success with that campaign, or was it secondary?
So it's a great question. So I'm going to distinguish between Ice Bucket 1, the original, and Ice Bucket 2, the second attempt. So, as I said, the first Ice Bucket Challenge was organic, and as a result, we didn't sort of really need to get the local chapters on board. The chapters came along with everybody else. But what we immediately did was, once it started to take hold, particularly in Boston, we immediately messaged out to the rest of the community that, this thing is happening, and, and we really want everybody to get behind it. We never sort of got out front of it, but we were behind the scenes kind of fanning the flames to try and help keep the momentum going. And so we certainly message that this is something good to participate in, and, and so both with that and the second attempt, where we then very explicitly said, all right, we need everybody to try and make sure that we can make this an annual thing and have everybody come along. What we came up against was chapters who were concerned about their walk revenue, and
sure.
As I suspect many of you would be, that if we try this new campaign and people donate to it, or there's confusion, then suddenly our walk revenue is going to go down, and we're not going to have the numbers that we were hoping for our walks. And what we've tried to stress is, yes, it's obviously nobody wants to mess with walk and with this great fundraising platform that we have. But at the same time, if we sort of don't get out of that mindset of how Walk to Defeat ALS drives all of our fundraising, we're never going to get out of the cycle of just focusing on people who have a connection and their supporters.
Right.
We have to think bigger, and we have to try and draw in new supporters who don't have a connection to ALS. And walks aren't going to do that, because walks are peer-to-peer fundraising. So we have to figure out, how do we make a connection to people that aren't going to end up at a walk? And the way to do that is to get everybody that's doing walks and everybody that's already a supporter to engage in another action, or to participate in some sort of other campaign, and try and transition people from being just walk donors and supporters to being supporters of the whole mission and the cause itself. And so that's definitely a challenge, but I think it's critical for organizations. Now, if you're a very very young and a small organization who is absolutely must have the walk revenue, or have the fundraising revenue that you depend on come in, from a year to a year, maybe now is not the best time to start introducing new campaigns, and just make sure that you're able to sort of build on what you have and grow that. But we were in a position where we obviously had now a significant source of funds, and we could start to look at how do we expand this beyond what we've been doing in the past and try and do something new.
Right. So fascinating. I wish we had another hour. Thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate it. Any final thoughts you want to share before we close out today?
No, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate everybody's questions, and yeah, I wish I had time to answer more here, but I'm happy to, if folks want to shoot, I'll put my email in here again, and folks
Great.
Are obviously welcome to email me. I will try and do my best to answer as much as I can, but it's obviously a crazy busy time, and I finally have a VP coming, so I'll have some supporters.
Oh, good.
Some other stuff. So thank you, Alyssa, for organizing, and Robert, and for making this happen. This was great. I appreciate it.
Oh, our pleasure. We look forward to more of these conversations, and thank you for the generous offer of your contact information. I really feel, and I know that the folks at Independent Sector echo this, that our community is really as strong as our support for one another. So we're all busy, but I think all of you should feel free to reach out to one another. Hopefully you'll make some connections through the chat box. I'll leave it up for a moment here after this webinar, and hope you'll consider joining us in future webinars, and possibly in the mastermind if that's the right fit for you. So look forward to reconnecting soon. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.